prepared for the veterinarians for best management practices for beekeeping. So we can, so anybody's interested in mite resistance, the mechanisms, just stick around at the very end and we can cover that in just a few minutes. So I will put on the best management practices ones then. Okay, home and slideshow from the beginning. There we go. Okay, and I added this for North America because again, I didn't when I put this together, I didn't understand, and I still don't know anything about Slovenian beekeeping. So here's my recipe for healthy hives, just in general. You keep young, vigorous queens, so we get about 1.5 years out of a queen. Okay, we want to replace her before the bees do after 1.5 years. Provide good nutrition, minimize your parasite varroa levels, minimize your toxin load, toxins being poisonous plants, beekeeper applied miticides, or pesticide exposure. And then mainly be proactive rather than reactive. So the successful beekeeper anticipates the problem before it happens. The unsuccessful beekeeper is always reacting to the problem. Okay, so be proactive rather than reactive. Bottom line is, if you control varroa and provide good nutrition, most of your problems go away. So these two should always be your focus. Control varroa and provide good nutrition. So you have, with those goals in mind, what you can do, you can't change the weather, but what you can do is you can intervene in options. So your intervention options are stimulative feeding of sugar or protein, monitoring and managing varroa. That's something that you can do. Whether you want to requeen, whether you want to split the combs, whether you want to make increase. You can move combs around, you can add space. These are a list of the options that you can do. You can treat for disease, you can repair the colonies for winter. But these all are based upon your objective, your goal, okay? So if you are a hobby beekeeper and your main goal is that you can show your friends that there's bees flying in and out of a box, you don't have to do a lot of these things. If your goal is to make money, then you better be doing all of these things. If your goal is to produce honey, you'll have maybe a different objective than if your goal is to produce queens or your goal is to produce nukes. Always define your objective. So first, again, I did this for veterinarians. First one, determine your goals. So I listed some of the different goals that you could have right here. You know, whether you want to be certified organic. Okay, so first one, if your goal is to be spiritual or whatever, you know, you don't need any help from me. You got your own goals, you're on your own. If you're recreational or sideline, okay, so different goal, you pretty much just want to keep them swarming and see minimal work on there. If you want to produce honey, okay, this is, when I went out to Indiana to look at the neonics, this is Tim Ives. I GPSed and looked at Google Maps and I drove the perimeter. He is completely surrounded by genetically engineered, seed-treated corn and soybeans, as far as you can see. He's making 300 to 400 pounds of honey per hive and laughing at all the hoopla. Okay? Just to put it in perspective. If you want to make money, okay, well that makes beekeeping a little more difficult, okay? That's going to require more work on your part. If you want to make increase or sell bees, again, different management goal. If you want to do crop pollination, I'm showing work backwards from these goals. If you're maintaining industrial livestock, big time, you know, for pollination. So this is how most of these come to almonds on semi-trucks like this, massive amounts. If you want to save the bees, that's too much responsibility for me to talk about. You're on your own again on that one. Okay, so bottom line is, honeybees are a fascinating and eusocial insect. So are termites. So are ants. So are yellow jacket wasps, okay? But humans just seem to like honeybees better. But they're just an animal. It's the same kind of, if you study any kind of animal husbandry, the same principles apply to beekeeping. They're livestock, okay? treat your bees as though they were livestock, and you can love your livestock, respect your livestock, and manage them and care for them very well. You want to be a servant to your livestock and make their life as good as you possibly can make it. So for the beginners, I say, all beekeeping is local. So find a local successful beekeeper. The successful beekeeper, whose biggest, you can tell, is their biggest problem is every spring they got too many bees and they're trying to get rid of them by selling them or something so they don't swarm. That means you're a successful beekeeper. If you are short on bees, colonies dying, you're having to buy bees, you are not a successful beekeeper. Successful beekeepers have too many bees every spring. That's our problem. We have to sell 1,000 nukes to get rid of them every single spring. I like this quote from 1920 from Ticknor Edwards. He says, I'll read the whole thing. The bees have their definite plan for life, perfected through countless ages, and nothing you can do will ever turn them from it. You can delay their work, or you can even thwart it altogether, but no one has ever succeeded in changing a single principle in bee life. Understand your bees. And so the best bee master is always the one who most exactly obeys the orders from the hive. Okay? And that's what I do. I look at the hive to figure out what their orders are. The bees will tell you what they need if you learn to read the combs. That's Tiffany from Australia I was telling you about. Okay. Okay, we already did this, the business model. We understand the business model. Same thing. Okay, so the dynamics. We're going to be able to skip through a lot of this because you just saw it on the spring buildup. We'll probably skip all the way through spring here. Okay, and in the U.S. there's a bunch of different ecoregions, and management is going to be different in each ecoregion. So right now, if you're down in Slovenia near the coast, it's going to be different than if you're in Slovenia at the top of a mountain. Okay, so you got to understand your ecoregion. And for local adaptation, carniolan is not enough. If you're at the top of the mountain, you want a different carniolan than one down at the bottom. And when the climate warms up 5 years from now, you're going to want a different carniolan. So there'll still be carnica, but it's going to be different subspecies of carnica in each region. And here's the problem people in the US make. They say, oh, I'm going to be a treatment-free beekeeper. I'm going to buy packaged bees. I'm going to be all organic and everything. Those packaged bees are bred for one thing, for rapid buildup, for almond pollination, and then for honey production. At least in California, they are treated, those colonies are treated 5 to 10 times a year with amitraz. Okay? Just because you buy them and put them in your hive, they're not going to change. They're still totally dependent upon mite management by you. Okay. So queen age is, the age is not a chronological thing, it's how much sperm they use. So if you have long winters, and they're not rearing brood during the winter, you might get 3 or even 4 years out of a queen. If you're a California almond pollinator, 1.5 years, she's used up that sperm, and when she runs out of sperm, the bees will replace her, if the beekeeper doesn't. Okay, so the nurse bees run the show. We've already talked about, okay. Let's just skip through spring here. Okay, spring turnover, we've already been through all this. Well, here's what's interesting. Okay, the fastest growing livestock that we have is the inbred broiler chicken. Back in the day when I ran the farm store, it took 19 weeks to raise a broiler chicken from egg to slaughter. Nowadays, it takes 5 to 6 weeks. So when you buy a chicken to eat, it's only 5 to 6 weeks old. They grow really, really fast. Here's the growth rate of a broiler chicken. Here's the growth rate of package bees. They're faster growing than any livestock. Now, but the difference is, with the broiler chicken, their fat is on their body. If you add the fat of bees, the honey that is stored, that's the growth rate of the bees. That's the kind of weight gain. So we're talking about an animal that grows faster than anything else in animal husbandry. The honeybee is incredibly fast growing. And in order to do that, you need to provide really good nutrition. So you have a balance of recruitment versus attrition. So recruitment is how many larvae the workers are starting a day, and attrition is how many are dying each day of old age, by old age, by wearing their wings, by flying and foraging. And so they only grow if recruitment exceeds attrition. So you can't do anything about attrition. You got to work on recruitment. You need to keep them rearing brood as fast as possible, because you don't notice attrition. They fly out, they don't come back. You don't see dead bees, but you got 1,000 bees a day in the spring just flying off and disappearing. Okay, we did that one. Okay, so there's, in a colony, people say, oh yeah, my bees get to know me. If they're all dead in 35 days from old age, you're not going to get to know you very well, okay? So roughly you assume you have a complete turnover of the worker population about every 35 days in the hive. You got to replace every bee in the hive every 35 days. That requires 1 to 2 pounds of pollen every single week. That's why if there's any bad weather, we're out there feeding pollen sub. Okay, we did all this. Okay, yeah, okay. Feeding. Okay, so for feeding of colonies, you got sugar, protein, or snake oil. So sugar feeding, typically you do a 1-to-1. The easiest, most effective, let's put it this way. It's difficult for bees to suck up heavy syrup. It's hard for them to get it through their proboscis, and it doesn't give enough moisture for brood rearing. So for brood rearing, you want a light syrup, about 50% sugar, 50% water. That's kind of optimal for stimulation for brood rearing. If in the fall you want them to just put on weight, then you want to do minimal water, so you're going to use a 2-to-1 syrup. There may be advantages to inverting the sugar syrup, either using an acid inversion, or in the United States we use high fructose corn syrup and mix that with sucrose and get a mixture of glucose, fructose, and sucrose, and the bees do very well on that. You can get a much higher sugar content with a mixture of sucrose and high fructose corn syrup. The most you can do with sucrose is at 66%. You can get up to 77% if you add glucose and fructose to it. In cold weather, you don't want to be feeding much water, because that can cause dysentery. So you'll typically feed a fondant or a candy, a hard candy of sugar, and the bees make enough metabolic water to dilute that. You have to put in protein. There's no reason to feed protein if there's a natural pollen flow on, generally. They will remove it, but it's not consumed. They will just carry it out of the hive. They'll suck all the sugar out of the pollen sub and then carry the protein out. So don't waste your time feeding if there's already a natural pollen flow on. Here's a trial that I did of the growth of the bee colony strength over time during a pollen flow. So the blues, the control group, not fed. The reds, the fed group. There's no advantage whatsoever in putting pollen sub in. Okay, we got the water. Okay. Okay, you don't quite have small hive beetle yet. It's critical to put the pollen sub right in the center of the cluster. Any that laps over outside where there's no bees, the bees will not touch. Okay, it has to be near the nurse bees. They're not going to touch it. But the small hive beetle loves that. Get in there in between the paper, sneak an egg in there where the bees won't get it. So when the small hive beetle arrives here, you've got to be more careful with the feeding of the pollen sub. There's the small hive beetle larvae right there. Looks kind of like wax moth larvae, but you really learn soon enough. Okay, so hive inspection. First you do external inspection and then internal inspection. So first thing, appropriate weight. So you can't do this. Our freestanding hives, you just walk down the road and hefty hive. The ones that aren't putting on weight, you open them up and find out why. If they're putting on weight, they're doing okay. Okay, so that's your first external assessment. Appropriate flight. Look at the flight patterns. See if they're bringing back nectar. See if they're bringing back pollen. Look at the size of the abdomens. If they're flying out with small abdomens, they're coming back with fat abdomens, they're bringing back nectar. If they're coming back with skinny abdomens, there's no nectar out there. See if they're bringing in pollen. That would probably indicate whether they have a queen or not. And look for signs of disease at the entrance. So first, weight gain. Okay, so here we actually, you can see they have a nectar flow on. Look at the distended abdomens right here. Very easy to tell. The crop full of nectar. So we know just by one glance at the entrance that these colonies are on a nectar flow, and they're going to be probably storing honey when they look like that. Incoming pollen, check for that. Oh. This is chilled brood, so if you have a cold night, the bees will contract the cluster, they'll abandon the drone brood, the drone brood will chill, the next morning you're going to see pulled out white drone brood, very rarely a worker brood, that's just chilled brood from a cold night. So it's not a sign of disease, it's a sign that they were expanding that cluster and they were not expecting that cold weather. So they'll sacrifice the drone brood first. Hot weather bearding, that's totally normal, nothing to be concerned about. Shock brood, these mummies, nothing you can do about it. You can persist, you can requeen. At least in most environments, it comes and goes in waves. So you may see chalk brood for a year or something, or two, and then it just disappears. So chalk brood is constantly evolving different variants. The bees have to build up immunity to that variant, and then it pretty much disappears. If you have crawlers out in front of the hive in the morning, that may indicate nosema in the hive. And so one time I went to a group and they said, okay, here's 10 hives. And I walked down the front and said, okay, this one looks like it's queen, right? This is a newly installed package. This one just swarmed. This one right here has this disease. And then they go, how could you tell all that just walking down, Randy? How could you tell the colony just swarmed? Dead virgin queen on the ground. That colony just swarmed. So learn how to assess the colony just walking down the road. Look out in the entrance of the hive. You can learn a lot about the colony before you can open it up. Dysentery does not mean nosema. I visited one apiary. We all went out there for lunch, and these people said, we are varroa free. There's no varroa in our operation. This is some years ago. And we're going to have a big lobster bake, and they're so proud of their varroa free hives. We get out of the car, we start walking over the ground, and I go, I kind of doubt you're varroa free, because I can see deformed wing crawlers walking on the ground. When you see that, you've probably got a problem. This tells you you've got a varroa problem in the hive. When you see dead bees, it could be anything. It could be pesticide kill. It could be chronic bee paralysis virus. They will drop down, you see a bunch of twitching bees. It looks like a pesticide poisoning, but it's chronic bee paralysis virus. It could be starvation, so you want to inspect why that's happening. If you have every hive with dead bees, suspect pesticides. If it's the occasional hive, then it's probably chronic bee paralysis virus, or half the hive, it feels lightweight, then it was probably starvation. Okay? This is, again, springtime starvation due to lack of nectar flow. Very easy with these rapidly growing nucleus hives. This is chronic paralysis virus right here. Just a whole bunch of dead bees, or bees dying and twitching on the bottom. It looks just like a pesticide kill, but it's a virus. Or a pesticide kill. You see just a bunch of dead bees. Okay, so dysentery does not mean nosema. You got to do microscopy. You take a sample of bees, not from the entrance. If you take a sample from the entrance, the flying bees, it'll scare you. You're going to see a lot of nosema. Don't worry about that. Always take it from the younger bees inside, and that'll give you a more accurate assessment of whether nosema is a problem in that hive. So this is if you squash that bee, it's a picture of the midgut. This is a tracheal breathing tube. Every one of these little ovals is a nosema spore. That's how dense the nosema is in an infected bee. Very easy to see under the microscope. So here's dysentery. Bees flying out, but this is not a sign of nosema. This is dysentery from excess moisture. But if they do start pooping, it can spread nosema spores. Okay. Okay, so this is from Mariana Ihes. The emergence of brood is the primary natural defense against nosema, allowing replacement of infected bees with healthy young bees. This is a generic rule for any disease. The tool that the bees have for any kind of stress on the colony is raise more soldiers. Okay? That's how they deal with almost everything. Just raise more brood. So you can help them with that with nutrition. Pesticide kill, cold weather, parasites, help them out nutritionally and they can get around that. Another trick, I don't think I have this in here, if you have really weak colonies that are doing very poorly, put two of them together. By simply increasing the cluster size, a lot of those colonies will suddenly just turn around and grow. When a small cluster is struggling, you make a larger cluster, suddenly everything gets better for them. Don't worry about looking for the queens, just put the two small colonies together, and a lot of times they magically just get better. So he says, and thus colonies with vigorous young queens are less prone to suffer from leukemia infection. I agree with that. So internal inspection. We're going to look at the propolis seal, cluster, seasonally adjusted colony strength, response to smoke, whether they have a queenless roar sound, honey reserves, and white wax would be things to be looking for. And you guys are professionals. For the hobbyists, I say work with a professional who knows what they're doing to learn what to look for. So first thing is, when you crack the cover, you want to feel a propolis seal. If there's not a propolis seal, that colony often will be sick. That will be the first sign that you don't have enough propolis. So you want to see propolis. You're going to look at the brood. So let's look at a few of these. Okay, so usually one frame is all you need to look at. One center frame from the upper part of the brood nest will tell you everything you need to know. So one glance at this one, this colony is fine. No problem. Got nice brood pattern, high larval survival, adequate honey stores, a little bit of bee bread right here, adequate nutrition. Obviously queen right, what else do I need to know? Done. So typical inspection, hive inspection for me, is like 15 seconds. Boom, goes back up. You're in and out of the hive, you can inspect the hive. So this is healthy brood, good larval survival because you have very few missing cells. These are healthy, they're not dying right there. And you have a good age of progression of the larvae, from small larvae up to large larvae, step by step. That means every larva is surviving. Again, good larval survival, good age-wise progression. Big problem. Okay? Those of you who were with me yesterday at the museum, they showed a slide of larvae. I go, why did you show that slide? That slide obviously got a problem. And the guy said, what do you mean? I said, they're all different ages next to each other. That means they are either dying or being cannibalized and then being replaced by the queen laying another egg. There's something wrong with this colony right here. This requires further inspection. Okay, so this is a very quick diagnostic here. Again, I made this for veterinarians, so people don't know about beekeeping. Nutritional status. Spotted brood, this is taken in August. What's that mean? August, see spotted brood, what's it mean? Anybody? Not all one time. What does this mean? August, spotted brood. It means that nurse bees don't have enough protein, so they're cannibalizing the eggs. That's how it does the larvae. Totally normal. Not a problem in any way. So in August, you're not trying to raise bees yet for winter cluster. Leave alone. This is normal. Okay? If you saw this early in the springtime, you suspect a European foul brood or something. But in August, this would be normal. If you have a mixture of colors of the pollens, your bees will probably be doing fine. If there's only one color of pollen, maybe not, because that one pollen may be nutritionally incomplete. Like dandelion pollen is nutritionally incomplete, so it depends upon a mixture that is nutritionally complete. Okay, so this is in our area. We have this fluorescent orange bee bread coming in the late summer in our colonies. And they just all looked sick. Notice, look at all this bee bread. Look at these larvae. They're all dying. And we couldn't figure it out. Until I got out a microscope and found out that's not pollen. That's the spores of blackberry rust fungus. And I did check on Google, and you guys do have blackberry rust fungus in Slovenia. I don't know if you see this. But late season, if you see fluorescent orange pollen, not just orange, but fluorescent orange coming in, or you see fluorescent orange bee bread, those colonies will go down, they'll nosedive. You throw in a pollen patty, and 2 days later they start to get better. Okay? So watch out for this one. Okay, so your assessment, I mentioned before, was about nutritional status, is how much jelly around the larvae. This colony, you are the world's best beekeeper. You couldn't kill this colony. This colony is recruiting at a very high rate. Just one glance at the jelly tells me this colony is doing great. This one right here. Look at the jelly around the second instar larvae. Wall to wall. This colony is great. You're a great beekeeper. They're cutting back on the jelly. They're giving them just enough to eat, but no excess, okay? So this means this colony is under nutritional stress. This colony, looking great. This colony, nutritional stress. You guys all notice the difference? Look at the amount of jelly. That tells you everything you need to know. The nurses will not produce an inadequate jelly, a non-nutrition big jelly. They will just stop producing jelly and start cannibalizing larvae. So, we talked about seasonality of disease. So the trick is you ignore the normal. You look for the anomaly. Look for the thing that is wrong. Don't focus on the normal. Look for anything that stands out that's wrong. And that takes training your eye to look for the anomaly. Shock brood. Okay, we saw that. European foul brood. Okay, first glance. You were asking me about first glance. So I was trying to get a bit better race. An experienced beekeeper will look at this frame from 20 feet away and say, oh, you got European foul brood. That's a very distinctive sign of what a European foul brood colony brood frame looks like. Then you get inside and you start to see these larvae twisting in the cells right here. That twisting is European foul brood. Again, the twisting larvae right here. A little discoloration. And then you'll see the tracheal tubes will stand out white. So if we use the tetracycline, you guys aren't allowed to. You're stuck with other things. Okay, American foul brood. Different symptoms. You see the perforated sunken capillaries. Not a hole in the middle, but little holes around the edges right here. So very distinctive for American foul brood. Frame at first glance, sunken cappings. So again, 20 feet away, bang. I can tell you American foul brood without even getting close. Learn to recognize those signs. Yeah?
There's a lot problem with American foul brood. There's a lot problem. Often they happen.
It depends on where you live. In Slovenia, I'm hearing yes. In California, no. Except for in San Francisco, where you have a bunch of treatment-free beekeepers trying to save the bees. There's a American foul brood epidemic. Yes. So here's American foul brood. Again, all these little perforations, and then the larvae dying. Again, American foul brood, we call this a salt and pepper pattern, very typical of American foul brood. Again, little tiny perforations, and the cappings sink down. And the most distinctive thing is the color. You may also have a pupal tongue. So the tongues of the dying pupa will stick to the top, so you'll see pupal tongues. But this color, the only disease that causes this caramel color is American foul brood. Very, very distinctive. And if you stir a dry stick in there, pull it out, you get this long, snotty rope that pulls out, usually with a distinctive smell. So this is the American foul brood test. And we used to do this all the time, this test right here. And then the bacteria causes the larval protein to melt down and turn into a glue, and then glue the spores to the bottom of the cell. So you have this black foul brood scale that is difficult to scrape out. Any other dead larva, you can scrape the cocoon out. With foul brood, it's glued to the bottom of the cell. And there's a pupal tongue right here. There's scale right there. It's a very distinctive signs of American foul brood. Okay, to look for it, what you do is you hold the top bar next to you. Now, if you want to do an inspection for either varroa feces or American foul brood, you have to have the sun to your back. So here's a big trick. If you look around for the sun, when you find it, you just blind yourself and won't see it, you haven't seen anything. Okay, so if you want to know if the sun's to your back, look at the ground and face your shadow. When you are facing your shadow, 100% of the time, the sun will be directly behind your back. Okay? Okay? Now you hold the frame up horizontally like this, you look and you can very easily see that scale in the bottom of the frame. If you're looking for varroa feces, the same thing, find your shadow, hold it up, put the bottom bar towards you, and you'll see the white fecal deposits on the ceilings of the cells. So for a foul brood, top bar towards you, for varroa, bottom bar towards you. And here's the treatment for American foul brood. Sac brood, virus, nothing much you can do. Nothing. Chronic paralysis virus takes two forms. One, all the trembling bees on the bottom board. The other we call hairless black syndrome. So this is the virus causing the bee to put out a smell. The virus makes it do this. The smell tells the other bees, oh, bite me, groom me, pick off the hairs of my body. Now, if I pick off one of your hairs, that's dead protein. There's no transmission of disease. But bees don't have hair. They have setae. Their hairs are hollow, and they have hemolymph inside every hair, every setae. When they bite it off, they expose the hemolymph with the virions, the infected virions, and they transmit it to the other bees. So the virus causes the other bees to put out a signal that says, bite off my hairs and transmit me to you. And so they bite all the hairs off the bees, and the bee is polished black, and they're tattered wings from being bitten. That's what the virus does. They trick the bees to spread it. Okay, just like a virus causes you to sneeze and transmit, with chronic bee paralysis virus, they cause the other bees to pick off the hairs. Okay, so here's small hive beetle larvae compared to wax moth larvae, which get larger. The leg structure is different between the small hive beetle and the wax moth larvae, and these have little hairs on them also. This is called a small hive beetle slime out. You probably won't see very many here. That's usually in tropical or very humid climates where you see slime outs. In your climate, probably all you're going to have to do is just maintain strong colonies to avoid small hive beetle problems. And what beekeepers do, they take these Swiffer or Dynamax towels from the store, put them in here. The bees shred them, and the small hive beetles get stuck in the shredded fabrics. And every couple of weeks, just pull the towel out and put a fresh one in. And this traps the small hive beetle, so a non-chemical control for a small hive beetle.
It's enough?
It's often enough.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do. There are other tricks, not all of them legal, to deal with it. But this, when I talk, I don't have very many small hive beetles. When I talk to beekeepers in small hive beetle area, most of them are using this method. Varroa. By the time you start seeing it in the back of bees, it's already too late. So now we're getting into, first sign is this ball brood. This is called uncapping behavior. This is the main mechanism that naturally mite-resistant bees do. There's some olfactory cue that tells them there's mites in that cell. We're not quite sure what that cue is. And they uncap the cell, and the founder's mite climbs out and leaves the cell, leaving a brood behind it, and they die. The baby mites die. And that slows down the reproductive success of the Varroa mite, because the female mite has just lost one reproductive cycle. She's only good for about 2 to 3 reproductive cycles. So this uncapping behavior, once she's left, the bees may recap that cell back over, and we'll get back to some pictures on that. Now they may also then remove the pupa. But the pupa will not have any melanization. So if the pupa died from a virus, it will turn dark, the body, and you'll see melanized pupa. That's just called hygienic behavior. They're sick. If they're pulling it out and it's bright white, that means you're taking a healthy pupa and chewing it out before it's died. That's Varroa-sensitive hygiene. So the combination of uncapping behavior and Varroa-sensitive hygiene are the two main mechanisms that resistant bees use to control Varroa. Here's a sign of deformed wing virus. Deformed wings are bees that are unable to emerge from the cells, typical of deformed wing virus. We call this parasitic mite syndrome. The larvae and pupae start dying from deformed wing virus, and it starts looking really ugly like this. And this is just before they collapse. And okay, treatments for disease. Quick AFB, burn or strict swarm. EFB, you can't use antibiotics, so you're kind of stuck. Strict swarm. Nosema, Nosema, others. In the beekeepers I know, none of us treat for nosema anymore. We just, the bees. I don't want to keep bees that I got a baby. So we're pretty rough. If they can't take care of themselves, we don't breed off those queens. So if they can't handle nosema, I'm not breeding off of them. So you can see, I don't know about how they are here. Shock root, there's no proven treatments. Viruses, all you're going to do is eliminate varroa and provide good nutrition. And the viruses pretty much disappear. And for varroa, I showed you 2 days ago different treatments there. Probiotics, I just finished testing 2 different brands. We saw no benefit on strength, no benefit on colony weight gain. I'm just getting the data back from next-gen sequencing by the USDA lab to see if there's any benefit in the gut microbiome or suppression of pathogens. So these 2 brands, no benefit in any way except for to the manufacturer of these. Took your money for something that does no good at all. Now that's not to say that the problem with these 2, none of the strains of bacteria, either of these, even though they were marketed to beekeepers, were bacteria that live in the core bacteria in the bee gut. They're just different animal probiotics. If there are in Europe some probiotics sold that actually have cultured the bee gut bacteria, and they could possibly have benefit. So I'm not saying across the board, but the 2 brands sold in the United States are pretty much of not value. And here's the problem. Beekeepers are just suckers for snake oils. We call them snake oils in the United States. They all want magic in a bottle they can pour in their beehive and make all their problems go away. Okay? We don't buy any of them. Okay? You know, unless, when somebody wants to sell you a product, say, let me see the hard data from a controlled trial. If they don't have hard data from a controlled trial, they can show you published data, I'm not wasting money on it. Okay, so the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are chilling, poor nutrition, toxins, and parasites. So all problems can be narrowed down to these 4 different problems. And the bees respond to all of them by recruiting more baby bees. So we help them out with recruitment. Okay, so let's see what we got here. So what works for me, I eliminate varroa, I provide stimulatory nutrition if necessary, I spot treat, European foulbrood, you can't do that. I increase the cluster size by combining sick colonies, and I maybe will requeen if a colony just can't get it together. Okay, we already covered, let's go through this for me in post. Main honey flow, white wax. When you see white wax, that's the bees telling you something. They have run out of empty cells that they can store nectar in. And so they start to add white wax. So this is, they're saying, time to build a new comb. This is the only time they'll draw a foundation. There's no magic, there's no secret formula you put in. If they're not making white wax, they will not draw foundation. But if they are making white wax, you better get either comb or foundation in there, or they're going to plug out and they're going to swarm.
Sorry, do you use the plastic foundation too? No?
I use a wax-coated plastic foundation. I do, yes.
Plastic?
Yeah. I was hesitant when they first came out, but boy, it sure makes beekeeping easier. And it solves a lot of problems. Okay, pollen flows over, bees go into survival mode. And before I came to Sylvania, I said colonies are often stocked beyond the carrying capacity of the landscape. That's before I came here, but I found a really good example of stocking beyond the carrying capacity of the landscape. I still feel sorry for you guys. Okay, so at that point, the bees want to eliminate extra mouths to feed. Once the honey flows over, they want to eliminate mouths to feed because they want to hold on to their honey until the next pollen flow starts. So they drop that population very, very quickly. And then you'll see this spotty pattern typically in August. That's normal. Varroa, we already talked about varroa, so we can skip that. I did this one for the poster child for the treatment-free beekeeper, so they can see what it was. This is an interesting one. We were testing formic acid treatments, and after the treatment, we pulled frames of sealed brood out, take a capping scratcher, take the cappings off, and then bang the frame on the lid of a hive, and then we count how many mites are alive and how many were killed by the formic acid. And then one of the hives, we didn't brush all them off and left those pupae there. And I walked back a few minutes later, and there was one newly emerged bee that wasn't pupa, that had come out, that was still very young, hadn't even hardened its wings. And every mite on that bottom board had crawled off those pupae and crawled on that one poor bee. Out in the sunlight, after formic treatment and banging, those mice, being completely blind, were all able to locate the one single adult bee on that lid and climb on it. Really told me a lot about Varroa's olfactory ability to detect a bee to climb onto. Okay, monitor mite levels. Okay, I think we've been to that. And imagine that every high mite hive that you don't treat is like a sneeze of mites just going out into the environment to all your neighbors. So winter survival is based upon late summer management. This is when we start getting ready in September for winter, because these bees reared here are going to turn into your winter bees right here. And okay, you saw that other graph like this here. So first you control your mites, so that you take care of the virus issues, and then you start feeding pollen sub if necessary. No sense starting feeding pollen sub while you have mites, because you're just going to be raising more mites. So first get the mites down, and then stimulate brood rearing. Here's something interesting I found, and is that this is early November. The bees are going into winter cluster. During the summer, if we crush a bunch of bees from inside, there's no pollen in the guts of the forager bees or the older mid-age bees, only in the nurse bees. So a large proportion of bees will have no pollen. November, going into winter cluster, every single bee has pollen in its gut. So I just finished collecting. I've been going out taking weekly samples from a hive and freezing them every week from late last summer all through the winter until the pollen flow just started the day before we took the last sample the day before we left for this trip. We're going to go back now and Rose is going to learn something new, how to use my crusher, and we're going to count what proportion of the bees have pollen in their guts over that course of that time period and see how long they maintain pollen in their guts during the winter. I'm curious. I've never seen any published data on that. We're feeding pollen sub and syrup, get ready for winter. If the bees are not consuming the pollen sub, they probably have a problem. We put the lid down and we don't even look at that colony again. Don't waste our time. 80-20 rule, don't waste your time on colonies with problems. But if you have foul brood, you should take a look. So we're not dealing with American foul brood. If you have American foul brood, always take a look at a dying colony. Make sure it doesn't have American foul brood. Auto management, we take ours in the winter way heavier than what you guys are doing here. But we have a larger cluster going into winter. So we're talking about 60 kilograms would be typical for a hive going into winter. 60 kilograms total weight. And here's a very good adage. Take your winter losses in the fall. Don't even try to winter weak or sick colonies. Just combine them. And now we don't combine a weak colony with a strong colony ever. Because there's a reason that colony is weak. If it's got a disease, no sense mixing those bees with a healthy colony. We combine weak colonies with weak colonies. Sometimes 3 or 4 weak colonies together into one. Or move the frames out and combine them. But we often will stack them 4 high. They'll all form a cluster, and they'll often spontaneously get healthy. So we combine our weak or our sick colonies. Again, watching out for American foul brood. Top insulation, you don't have to, you're indoors, so you don't have to worry about that. Once they stop brood rearing, once the last brood is hatched out, oxalic acid dribble out in the fields. My son's putting it on with the garden sprayer. And we're back to winter. Leave them alone, I think we're done. There we go.